You know, these are all huge multinational American corporations that are involved in the agricultural sector. And the United States is itself an agricultural company. They're interested in working in Zambia.
But why are we not seeing these companies in Zambia?
Well, they are here. They're just not here in as big a scale as they would like to be. But you know, I think the reason, I mean, you had Honorable Lubinda on your show last weekend, and I think that he has the right ideas about how to reform the sector in order to attract foreign investment, for that matter, to attract domestic investment. You know, again, from the speech that I gave at the University of Zambia, I think it's very important that the government allow the private sector to flourish, because the private sector is what really drives growth, and especially that's true of small and medium-sized enterprises. I mean, this is something that is not widely understood about the United States. 2/3 of the growth in the United States, 2/3 of the employment in the United States is generated by small and medium-sized companies. So yeah, we have all these big corporations and stuff, but most people work for, you know, for small enterprises, medium-sized enterprises. And I think that that's a model that Zambia could, you know, could easily follow.
So particularly, if you were to be specific, why are these huge agricultural companies not having a huge presence in Zambia?
Well, I can give you one specific example. Is the fact that that the government sets the price for maize. So when you have a government that's intervening in an economic sector and setting prices, that's a disincentive for anyone actually to invest in the sector. It's very straightforward. You know, capitalist economics works on the basis of price signals. So if, let's take the energy situation here, for instance. You've had gasoline shortfalls, you've had shortages, right? You know, if you have a situation where the price fluctuates depending on supply, then the market clears.
There seems to be a bit of a difference here. You're talking of a small economy whose private sector is not as strong, and chances of the majority and the masses being exploited by a minority private sector are very high. It's a different situation with the United States, where
it's
private
actually
sector
not.
is well established, enough competition.
It's a very good point.
Not the case in Zambia.
It's a very good point, but it's actually not fundamentally different. What is the role of a government in an economy? Is it to run the economy? Is it to produce goods and sell them and set prices? Or is it to regulate and to ensure that people are being treated fairly, that products are safe, and that people are not being you know, ripped off, as you know, the kind of American slang would have it. I would argue that that's what a government should do. A government should create the sinews of an economy. It should create the infrastructure, the roads, the railroads, the airports, the ports, and it should regulate the economy and ensure that it's functioning in a fair, open, transparent manner. It should not actually be involved in the actual running of the economy, because governments don't do that very well. Private companies do it better. So to get to the mining sector, because we haven't actually finished that. So, okay, so in fact, before I even get to that, let me talk briefly about power generation, because I also think this is an area where Zambia has huge potential, and it's something that I find kind of almost intellectually interesting, in that Africa has an opportunity to basically skip a generation of development in power that occurred in the West and in the United States in particular. So, you know, in our history, we had this moment in, I guess, the 1930s, really, where we spent an enormous amount of money electrifying the rural areas of the United States. Zambia doesn't actually have to do that. There has been so much progress in the last few years in creating solar power units, household units, where you basically turn the roof of your home into a collection, a solar collection agent. You have a storage capacity, and you can power your home yourself. You don't have to actually be connected to the grid. You can be connected to a mini grid, you know, with your neighbors, and you can swap electricity. But you can see, I hope, the potential that this would have for a country like Zambia, with villages in far-flung parts of the country that have never had electricity. You can set up your home, in the northwestern province of Zambia, far removed from any major town, and you can actually generate electricity yourself, and you can sort of come into the 21st century in a sense.
We need to change the approach, focus.
Well, I guess yes. I would argue that that you have the opportunity to do something that we didn't do, which is to focus on renewables, on solar,
Clean
and
energy.
smaller scale, clean energy. The United States, at the time that we were industrializing, we went in the direction of big power projects, hydroelectric dams that are huge, like Hoover Dam, for instance, which is much bigger even than Kariba is. Coal-fired plants that generated electricity, all of this sort of stuff. And Zambia has an opportunity to avoid that, to sort of skip that whole complicated period of industrialization and go straight to renewable energy. And you, in the process, I think, will be able to generate a surplus, in particular because of the hydro potential of Zambia that's exportable. Again, it's a sector where there's enormous potential for growth. And frankly, if you were able to generate more electricity domestically, then the knock-on effect of that to the economy would be very great as well. What I mean by that is just simply that if you're a manufacturer, let's say a foreign investor, and you're thinking about setting up a company, a manufacturing plant in a country, one of the first things that you're going to look at is there a stable source of electricity? Because you can't afford to have the company go dark, the plant go dark for hours or days at a time. So this is one of the things that Zambia needs to do in order to take a step forward economically, is to develop a stable electrical grid. And for you, it's not that far in the future, and it's not going to cost you anywhere near as much as it cost the United States, for instance. Okay, so the mining sector. Sorry,
before
go
we
ahead.
move away from the energy sector, President Obama's trip last year, recent trip, he announced that $7 billion project to increase electrical infrastructure in sub-Saharan Africa.
Right.
Is Zambia part of that?
Yes, it is. And we in fact have a team coming next week specifically to talk to the Zambian government about Power Africa, which is what the initiative is called. And their message to the Zambian government is going to be exactly the message that I just passed on to you, which is that Zambia is a country with enormous potential. It has unmet needs, but it has potential. And how you realize that potential and meet those needs is important in and of itself. In other words, should you be building gigantic hydroelectric dams that cause environmental damage, or would it be better to build smaller scale ones that are less expensive, that require less capital expenditure up front? Would it be better to go the solar route rather than trying to run power lines to all parts of the country? I would submit that the answer is kind of obvious, actually, that the most efficient and most environmentally sound way for Zambia to go forward in terms of electricity production is smaller scale and renewables.
Let's move on to the mining sector.
Okay. Obviously, it's the single most important sector of the economy, especially from the point of view of foreign investors, because it's the part of the economy that gets the most attention internationally. Our position on this has been that we actually don't have an American mining company that's involved in the sector. And how we've viewed this is that, well, we've been very supportive, frankly, of President Lungu's call for a win-win. That's not so easy to do all the time, but we've been supportive. We've tried to help to facilitate discussions between the mining companies on the one hand and the government on the other. I guess how I view this is that that the single most important thing is that the two sides talk to each other, that they dialogue, and that they find compromises and agreements that allow, first of all, for the mining companies to be successful, to make a profit, to employ in the process, thousands of Zambian workers, to generate economic growth for the country. At the same time, it's also very important that those companies be properly regulated by the government, that they pay their due share of taxes, and that the country as a whole benefit really in every way from the presence of international mining companies in Zambia, which I believe is what your president meant when he said we need to find a win-win.
From the viewpoint of an ordinary person, even the win-win situation doesn't look fair to them.
To whom?
Looks like to the ordinary person.
Well, okay. The mining companies would also say that that the new system that was put in place, where they dropped the royalty tax from 20% to 9% on open pit mines, the mining companies would also say it's not altogether fair. There's an old adage in the United States that if everybody's unhappy, then probably it's a fairly just outcome. I mean, it would be better if everybody were happy, but in business it doesn't always work that way. You have competing interests again. You have businesses that want to maximize their profit, but you want a government that wants to maximize its revenue. So these are two goals that are in conflict, and that's why you have to find a resolution that serves both interests, that serves both sides, that they both benefit from.
Let's look at trade. Zambia's exports to the U.S. have remained lower than $20 million.
No, is it 20 million? Yeah, maybe.
I
I don't know off the top of my head. It's not 20 billion, but
20 million.
Okay.
Dollars for the last five years. This doesn't look like a fair deal. Why are Zambians failing to penetrate the U.S. market?
Because it's a very big, complicated market, and the single most important thing in the United States is brand recognition. Because it's such a large market, you have to establish a presence. You have to create a reputation for quality. You have to produce a product that Americans want to buy. Americans are very savvy consumers. Where would Zambian exports to the United States come from? Keep in mind that we're quite a ways away from each other, right? So the kinds of products that Zambia could produce that Americans would be interested in buying, to my mind, are things like furniture, textiles, agricultural products potentially, flowers. Cut flowers could be something that would be exported to the United States. Now, how this all happens? I mean, when the AGOA summit was held here in 2011, when Secretary Clinton, presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, came here, we helped create an American Chamber of Commerce. We helped stand it up, and it's been here ever since. And the purpose of the American Chamber of Commerce is really to promote economic relations between the two countries. It's one of the purposes, anyway. So if a Zambian entrepreneur were interested in trying to export to the United States, the first place they should go is to the Chamber of Commerce to talk to them about, how do I do this? How do I sell products in the United States? One of the board members of the Chamber, for instance, markets jewelry, Zambian jewelry in the United States, and does quite well. So the reality is that the opportunity exists. It's really up to Zambians to take advantage of it. So there's no unfairness in this. I mean, the nature of economic relations is you have to have something that the other person wants to buy. In fact, we don't have a substantial trade imbalance between the United States and Zambia. I would argue that the bigger problem is that we don't have enough trade between the two countries. And there's not enough American investment into Zambia. And as I said at the beginning, that's my number one goal as an ambassador here, is to attract American trade and investment to Zambia.
You've set that as a priority for yourself.
Absolutely.
How is it going?
It's going. It's not something that you can do in a matter of months. It takes time to sort of explain this country to an American audience. Americans aren't really, let's say, the world's greatest when it comes to geography. So they have a tendency to view Africa as an undifferentiated whole. Okay,
so narrow perspective, narrow view.
Well, I don't narrow, yes, but I would say more uninformed, frankly. So if you have an Ebola outbreak in West Africa, you know, does that affect American impressions of Zambia? Yeah, unfortunately it does. It affected European impressions of Africa as a whole. It affected everyone's views of it, which to me is very strange because you know, West Africa is a long, long ways away from, you know, from Zambia. In fact, it's closer to the United States than it is to Zambia. But nonetheless, that's part of what my job is, and I do this actually in conjunction with your ambassador in Washington, Palin Molunda, an excellent guy. And you know, we've collaborated on a number of initiatives to try to explain Zambia to Americans, to help them understand that this is a country that is peaceful, is stable, is democratic, is increasingly prosperous, that it has a wonderful climate, that it's a beautiful place to visit. I mean, all of these things are true and are not widely known in the United States. So part of my job is actually to be a bit of a salesman for Zambia.
How do you explain the fact that AGOA initiative set up by the American government way back in 2000 hasn't been very successful?
Well, I'm not actually sure that it hasn't been successful. I guess I would take some issue with that.
Not very successful. Successful, not very successful.
In what terms? I mean, it has increased trade between Africa and the United States, and I can tell you that for African leaders, it's a very high priority for them that AGOA be renewed. This is, in fact, probably when the African Leaders Summit was held last year in Washington. There were, I thought, you know, there was one overriding message that I thought emerged from that summit, which is that Africa, thank you for the assistance, but we want investment too. We want to have a normal commercial relationship with the United States, and as part of that, they want AGOA renewed. And so, you know, every African country has basically come into Washington, and the diplomatic term of art is to démarche. They've made clear their wish that the U.S. Senate, U.S. Congress, renew the AGOA Act. So if it hasn't been successful, then I guess my question to you would be, why do Africans want it renewed?
They're hoping it would increase trade further.
Okay.
And it has done so.
So
which is not very...
But that means that it has increased trade, and they're hoping that it will further increase trade.
In your view, let's look at what you've spoken about, marketing Zambia and helping Zambia get into the United States. In your view, do you think Zambia is well positioned now to enter the United States market?
Increasingly so, but let me sort of lay out what I think Zambia needs to do in order to be economically successful. And as it becomes more economically successful, I think that it would actually have more of a presence in the American markets. In the first instance, you know, your ease of doing business ranking in the World Bank has actually slipped in recent years, and it's 111th in the world now. So, you know, this is a very broad brush sort of thing, but I think there's something important there in that it's to maximize the country's economic potential, you have to make it easy for businesses to do business, or easier anyway. So, you know, I think that should be one of the goals of Zambia's government, is to create a better enabling environment for businesses, whether they be Zambian or foreign. I think if you do that, you'll see your growth increase from 6-7% to more like 10 or 11%, which is what the IMF actually thinks you should be growing at, with the proper mix of policies. If you're generating 10% growth a year, my job, trying to sell American companies on Zambia, becomes a lot easier. There are lots of countries that grow at 6 or 7%. There aren't that many that grow at 10%. And how that would be interpreted internationally is that this is a country that gets it, that knows how to attract businesses and to allow them to flourish. A few other things. What would a foreign investor be looking for in a country? They're looking for stability, and the most stable countries are democratic countries over the long run. You can check that box, so that's a good thing. They would be looking for a well-educated populace. You know, if you're setting up, again, a manufacturing facility, you don't want to have to train your workers from, let me back up. You don't want to have to actually educate them. You know, you need them to be literate, because then it's much easier to sort of train them in the way that you need them to be trained in order to do their jobs. You need them to be healthy. You have to, no foreign investor, no domestic investor for that matter, wants to employ a workforce where they potentially would have a very expensive bill coming due at some point because of something like HIV/AIDS. So from Zambia's point of view, educate your young people, you know, continue to make progress in combating HIV/AIDS and create a healthier populace, create a better enabling environment, maintain democracy and stability, and I think, you know, you would see the results very shortly. You would see a jump in growth. You would see a jump in foreign investment. You would see a jump in international interest in Zambia. I mean, I always use the term that to my mind Zambia could be an African tiger, which is sort of an oxymoron because there aren't any tigers in Africa. But from an economic point of view, Zambia could be an African tiger. I think it's one of the countries in Africa that's best positioned to do that. One of the reasons I happen to think that, by the way, is because so we have this thing called the Washington Mandela Fellowship. This was another of President Obama's initiatives for how to help Africa. And it's a very prestigious, very competitive scholarship program that allows Africans to go to the United States and study. And it's actually usually people who are, they're not students per se, they can be managers, they can be government bureaucrats, and they go for a limited period of time, but they get exposure to very high-level people in the United States. So we have 500 scholarships a year that get dished out, right? And that's throughout the whole of Africa. And I think the numbers are 50,000 or more people apply for that every year. Zambia gets the 5th largest number of these Washington Mandela Fellowships of any country in sub-Saharan Africa. And, you know, the last time I checked, you're not the 5th largest country by population in sub-Saharan Africa. So, in other words, the human capital is here. You have really smart, energetic, entrepreneurial young people who want to do well. You know, and there's a famous sort of Ronald Reaganism, right, that the best thing that government can do is get out of the way of people like that and let them be successful.
Let them grow. Well, after your tour of duty is done, what do you hope to see in Zambia?
Well, it's only 3 years, so, you know, in one sense, I mean, you can't really transform a country in 3 years.
That would be too ambitious.
That would be, yes. I mean, I would love it if that were true. What I would like to see, I think, is to see Zambia headed in the right direction and making progress in the right direction. Yeah, I think that that's very possible. I think that it's easy for me to envision. Again, I'll come back to the tourism sector because I think that's low-hanging fruit. I think that Zambia could make real progress in the next 2 or 3 years on tourism. And you could actually be attracting millions of tourists a year to this country. There's no reason why you shouldn't.
Just besides protecting animals, that's one thing you've spoken about in tourism. I know you're very passionate about wildlife. What other things can Zambia do?
In the immediate future? Well, I think we've sort of already talked about it, but I guess I would make a priority educating young people, because if you think about the countries that have sort of jumped the table economically, that have grown fastest in the last 25, 30 years, almost all of them have one thing in common, that they prioritized education. And so I think that creates the capacity that allows for future growth. And so I think that's something that, you know, you can't start too soon. You should start it. You should have started it a while ago. You should start it soon. You should start it now, yesterday. And, you know, the reality of Zambia is that you've got, a funny sort of mix, right? Because on the one hand, as I said, you have this group of well-educated, smart, energetic young people, but you also have a problem with rural poverty. I mean, you have a lot of people who actually are who live in these villages. And when I went to Livingston, I spent some time on the road, stopped at a couple of the schools, you know, saw how eager these children are to learn, and yet they don't have a lot of resources. So I mean, I think that you can't actually be a successful economy, a successful country, if half of your population isn't being educated properly and doesn't have the opportunity to aspire to be a successful entrepreneur. So I would say that, you know, start it yesterday and do it throughout the country.
Master Schultz, time has run out. It's been a pleasure having you on the program.
Same.
So many things we could talk about on Zambia-United States relations. Thank you very much. Till next time. You've been watching Sunday Interview. Our guest this evening was Ambassador Eric Schultz, United States Ambassador to Zambia. Till next week at the same time, pleasant viewing.
We believe that banking isn't just about helping you save your money. It's about showing you investment solutions that grow it. Speak to our wealth management team today or visit any of our branches to get started on building a brighter, more prosperous future. Standard Chartered, here for good.